Hey, Cookie. I'm very happy to see that your paw that was run over by a car has recovered fully, unlike my shoulder that had minor surgery. So that's good. Oh, hey everybody. Welcome back to JL's Book Club, where we don't talk about Fight Club because I didn't read Fight Club. Before we get to this month's book, we obviously have a beverage of the month. And the beverage of the month today is milk. Regular old milk. Because when your mom visits and doesn't want that almond milk shit in her coffee, milk. So this month's book, for Black History Month, but it's a good book to read anytime. You shouldn't wait until February 2024 to read this masterpiece. It's called The Warmth of Other Suns. And don't try this at home. I'm a very big, strong man. It's a heavy book. Use two hands. Okay, safety first. By Isabel Wilkerson. Now, this is a book from 2010. I've had it for a few years. Actually, I think may have become first aware of it from Rod of The Black Guy Who Tips, who would read passages of it several years ago on his podcast, The Black Guy Who Tips. And I knew it was sort of considered a classic. It got incredible reviews, but I didn't know until I finally began it this month. And before I get into the passages and my deeper thoughts on the book, I'm going to do something. I'm going to waive the 5-month waiting period to get into the JL Book Hall of Fame. And I am announcing instant induction into the JL Book Hall of Fame for The Warmth of Other Suns. Why did I check the title like I didn't know what the title of the book was? Dementia, also a sponsor of this week's episode. Weeks, I do this monthly. You wish it was weeks. I can't read that much, people. What am I supposed to be, literate for the whole country and all 15 of you that watch these amazing book reviews? By the way, just a quick note, since I sometimes do this. I have 101 Patreon subscribers. I tallied up my followers on social media between YouTube subscribers, excluding Trump the Internet, where there's a lot of overlap, not 100% overlap, but a lot of overlap. Combining the 66,000 subscribers I roughly have on YouTube, the 129,000 followers on Twitter, the 8,000 plus on Instagram, and the 1,000 plus on Facebook, it's around 200,000 followers. I have 101 Patreon subscribers, which, according to the metrics, means I have quantifiably the worst fan base in the entertainment industry. So I just thought I'd put that out. Not you guys, obviously. You guys watching this are not only Patreon subscribers, you actually consume the content I put out. So clearly I'm not talking to the 11 of you watching this. I'm talking to the literally hundreds of thousands of people who are fans. Anyway, with that righteous anger, let's get into The Warmth of Other Suns. Now, I've singled out a couple of passages, but in broad strokes, this book, and I don't think I can praise it loftily enough, for so many years, The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright has been my favorite nonfiction book. It's still my favorite nonfiction book. The Warmth of Other Suns is of that level of nonfiction quality. And I think to have a great nonfiction book, what you need to have is basically incredibly detailed research, an interesting story arc, or in the case of this book, arcs, and incredible writing, like a narrative style that is just like engaging, as if you're almost reading fiction, as if you're reading something someone crafted from their imagination, but it's not. And this book has all three of those things, much like The Looming Tower. It was just sort of a pleasure to read from page one, basically. And when I say pleasure, there's obviously harrowing things. It's covering a span of history from 1915 to 1970 with details beyond that, but the Great Migration, which was the sort of massive influx of African Americans from the South into the different regions of the North, whether it be out west, the Midwest, or the Northeast. Her book follows basically three specific people with anecdotes about both celebrities and other people who followed these paths, but it basically follows one woman from Mississippi to the Midwest, Milwaukee, and then eventually Chicago. It follows a man who went from Florida, which, I've read enough about Florida during the Civil Rights and Jim Crow era. Mississippi probably kind of a Michael Jordan in terms of racism goats, where you just kind of go, oh, Mississippi, they're the worst, right? Whereas Florida is kind of like maybe a LeBron James or a Steph Curry, LeBron James level, kind of like, you can make a real argument that Florida is actually the racism goat in terms of the history of this country, which is old school racism fans will say, no, Mississippi, you have no idea what you're talking about. There's no movie called Florida Burning, okay? There's, that they'll sort of be locked in their ways. But I think if you look at the advanced metrics of bigotry, lynching, and racism, Florida, I think, can actually make a very strong case to being the most racist state in terms of history. And they've just sort of moved maybe slightly adjacent from racism to just batshit crazy. So always an interesting time in Florida. I'm looking forward to going to Disney later this year. So one individual is followed from Florida, which oddly enough, if you've been following me for a long time, a book I had recommended many years ago called Devil in the Grove, which won the 2013 Pulitzer Prize. And I was just on a show with the author, Gilbert King. How about that? Small world. That story is kind of covered in here in passing. But he goes from Florida to Central Florida to New York. And then the third story person is a Louisiana to California story. So we get, it's about a 600-page book, 540 pages. We get those three stories as kind of the main through lines of the history. One person, the woman in Mississippi leaves in the 30s. The man in Florida, I believe, leaves in the 40s. And the man from Louisiana leaves in the 50s. So you get three different eras, but three slightly different eras, but to three different regions of the country to show the different general paths that black people took during this momentous time in history. One of the things that the book covers beautifully is kind of this was basically an immigrant story, an immigrant struggle, because they were leaving a different society. They found problems and racism everywhere. Chicago especially gets the Florida, we're gonna have to start calling Chicago the Florida of the Midwest in terms of their racial history. But it's, you just sort of see that it was this journey that wasn't just Americans moving to a different state. This wasn't 2020 where you're going, I was in LA and I'm tired of taxes, so now I'm moving to Austin. No, this was like you might as well have been moving from Eastern Europe or South Africa to the United States in terms of the culture shift. So you get that idea, but then she's very, very specific in terms of saying, but every immigrant story that anybody might want to compare is different because within a generation, and she names celebrities who within a generation were able to change their name and become like massive celebrities or famous people because they didn't have to worry about the one thing that they could never depart from, which is their skin color, their race, with the exception of certain passing people. Half Blackface, my special coming out very soon. They're telling me 2049 now. We've got a locked-in date. I will be celebrating that with pudding and applesauce at my nursing home. So look for that, 2049, guys. But this, so basically, this, I can't express enough how great this book is in terms of all the qualities I said that have to go into a great nonfiction book. What I will say is this is basically like civil rights history with the incredible drama and emotion of the show 6 Feet Under on HBO, which, if you know me, you know I like a lot of television shows, but I rank 6 Feet Under for me as the best drama of all time. And you've got to go start to finish. You've got to experience the entire 5 seasons. When that finale hits you, it's incredible. And this book gives me that feeling of feeling like I've watched these somewhat inconsequential lives, but also very consequential lives as part of this major movement in American history. And you realize the scope of one humble individual is an epic story in and of itself. And it's part of an epic history that is a big part of this country. So it is one of these kind of like proverb type stories almost, where it's like the one grain of sand can change but it feels like that. And I know I'm making light of it, but it really feels like that. Like, you know, one person becomes like a successful surgeon, but he deals with it's a very frustrating journey for him to get there, and it shapes his personality. And you just it's just an incredible. I can't sum it up better than it's like a civil rights history told with the narrative and dramatic and emotional quality of the show 6 Feet Under. If that doesn't sell you on this book, well then I'm fine only doing these reviews for 9 people instead of 11, okay? 9/11, never forget, by the way. Don't know why I did that, but sometimes you just can't stop yourself from making a joke, no matter how hurtful. So, couple passages, brief passages I'm going to read to you. One involves an anecdote about a famous person. Robert Foster was the surgeon-to-be who came from Louisiana to California. So just to illustrate that these were common paths that these people took. You know, there were pioneers who struck out, and then if they had success or good stories to tell, other people would follow in their stead. Another boy from Monroe, who migrated with his parents to Oakland, took an entirely different path. He would go on to become one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Bill Russell was born in Monroe in 1934 and watched his parents suffer one indignity after another. His father once went to a gas station only to be told he would have to wait for the white people to get their gas first. He waited, and when his turn seemed never to come, he started to pull off. The owner came up, put a shotgun to his head, and told him he was not to leave until all the white people had been served. "Boy, you don't ever do what you just started to do," the station owner said. As for Russell's mother, a policeman once grabbed her on the street and ordered her to go and take off the suit she was wearing. He said that she had no business dressing like a white woman and that he'd arrest her if he ever saw her like that again. Bill Russell watched his mother sit at the kitchen table in tears over the straits they were in. Needless to say, soon after they moved to California. Now, 1934 is less than 100 years ago. Bill Russell passed away last year. He has a documentary on Netflix right now, which the passage I just read to you was more powerful than anything in the 3 hours in that documentary. I didn't know this. Like, in other words, Bill Russell, civil rights icon, great basketball player, statesman, wonderful man. Well, look at how his life began in the 1940s. You know, these were the experiences. In fact, the father just wanted to leave, and it was, of course, not about letting the white people get, it was about just shaming him. So he was willing to leave the gas station. They're like, no, you're going to wait. You have to let them go, and we want you to see them go before you, to shame you. And then his mother, for dressing in nice clothes, is accosted by a police officer. So that's the 1940s, you know, a time when both my parents were alive. Obviously, this book will not be getting taught in Florida anytime soon. But DeSantis, always carrying, you know, it's good that DeSantis is carrying on the traditions that are highlighted in this book. But I just thought that was such an interesting anecdote to include, because it was like, oh yeah, Bill Russell. Like, this would be seared into a man's memory. And many people would not want to know this history so that they could accuse someone like Bill Russell of being either unfriendly or divisive or playing the race card or whatever. Okay. I will just say in 2020, millions of white trash fairly lost an election, and they tried to destroy the government over it. A thought I had during this book, and it reminded me of a quote from my mother when she watched the documentary Attica on Showtime. She watched it and then called me and said, I don't know. If I was a black person, I'd probably be murdering people. And that's one of the things you get from a book like this and from history. And I think that's why so many white people react like this, because deep in their hearts, they're like, if this shit happened to me, I'd never stop murdering the people who did it to me and their ancestors. Like Magua in The Last of the Mohicans, I would wipe out their line. But black people don't do that. They complain somewhat. They want fair treatment. They try to do the best they can. Yes, due to circumstances often outside their control, they live in bad neighborhoods, in poverty, get caught up in certain things. This is not a blanket excuse for everyone who ever does a crime, but the systemic issues are laid out. If there was a court case against white people that black people brought against America, it'd be a long trial, but it'd be open and shut. The jury would be out for 45 minutes. They'd probably wait an extra hour so they could get the free lunch. And then they'd come back and go, white America is guilty as charged on all counts. Except Eminem, we acquit you. And this, I think this mentality, it's you know, I'm sort of at a loss for words, because the more books like this you read, like well-researched, like just basic history, you know, as I've always said, what's the cutoff line? You know, I remember when I heard, like, Harry Belafonte, civil rights activist, talented man, was the first artist in America to sell 1 million records, to go platinum. And I thought there were probably some people out there, plenty of people going, even good people. Yeah, I mean, well, obviously we have a black man selling 1 million records. First ever. No white person's done that. So how can you say this country isn't doing just fine? You just be clean cut like Harry Belafonte and everybody can enjoy your talent, and that's that. Well, Harry Belafonte was also bailing civil rights leaders out of jail and fleeing, murdering Klansmen in the South while trying to do civil rights work. So it wasn't all great for Harry Belafonte, and I don't think anybody would say, yeah, the 1950s, like, everything was fine by the 1950s. Of course not. But what's the dividing, you keep going, what's the line? Was it Obama's election? Okay, well, what happened 8 years later? On a relative scale, we elected our most racist president ever. And I say that, yes, somebody, maybe Andrew Jackson or Thomas Jefferson were more racist on an absolute scale. But a relative scale, Donald Trump had founding father, split up family, slave owner energy in 2020. So, in 2016. So that's, on a relative scale, I feel like if Thomas Jefferson were born in the 1940s, he wouldn't have been nearly as racist as Donald Trump was. So anyway, we go 2 steps forward, we take 8 angry N-word screaming steps back, it seems, in this country. But anyway, the other passage from here, guys, is about turn the page. This is about George Starling, the man who moved from Florida to New York. And this is just an interesting anecdote because I've had this conversation. And one of the things is, George Starling, this individual, he worked the trains, which would become Amtrak trains. But he worked these train lines, and some of the trains were the same names as trains I've gone on, which I just found very interesting, being biracial, because it's like my Irish grandfather, worked on some of these trains, and I just hope he wasn't one of the racist white guys. I don't think he was. But it would be weird if it was like all of a sudden you're reading a passage and his boss, John J. McBrien, was a real dick. Wait, what? No. But my grandfather, who I never met, he passed away 2 years before I was born. It's getting very emotional right now. He worked the trains. And then this guy is on trains, this black man is on trains that I've taken around the country. Same names, same routes in some cases. Like I've taken the train from New York to Florida. Private room though, come on. So here we go. At daybreak, the Silver Meteor, that's the one that hits up Orlando from New York. Silver Meteor wound its way into Pennsylvania Station at Newark, New Jersey. The conductor called out the name of the station in the city, and after so long a ride through the night and now into day, some passengers from the south gathered their things and stepped off the train, weary and anxious to start their new lives and relieved to have made it to their destination at last. Newark, it sounded so tantalizingly close to New York, and maybe some assumed was the way Northerners, clipping their words as they did, pronounced New York. It was confusing to have their intended destination preceded directly by a city with such a similar name and with an identically named station. New York Penn Station and Newark Penn Station. I just said 2 different cities and stations. If you are making your first trip in 1951 to New York and you hear Newark Penn Station, you might get off because you've been on the fucking train for 24 hours and you're still terrified of the South and you just want to get to the North. You're like, we're here. Can't miss this stop. It might take us to Boston, and I hear they're not too friendly to us there. And as they'd been riding for as many as 24 hours and were nervous about missing their stop, some got off prematurely, and it is said that is how Newark gained a good portion of its black population, those arriving in Newark by accident and deciding to stay. I had this conversation less than 2 months ago with the righteous GF, saying that exact thing. Like, do people ever like get to Newark Penn Station and go, oh shit, we're here? Perfectly reasonable. I think that's a dick move by the Penn Station family. Don't name your kids New York and Newark. What is this? Like, you know, and I've heard some conductors go, Newark Penn Station, New Jersey, and I go, that's what you got to do, because it doesn't make you dumb if you're like Newark. It's the Andrea of train stations. We're in Andrea Penn Station. It's Andrea, dick. Oh. Okay, reasonable mistake. Not really, it's Andrea. Okay, we're at Kristen Penn Station. It's Kirsten. Gross. Why didn't your parents just name you Kristen? Who the fuck is Kirsten? What is that? Are you from Iceland? Bjork? No? I'm calling you Kristen. Fuck off. So you can see how that would be very confusing. But I found that I found the train stuff very interesting, just in terms of you gain history of like these train rides that I take. And the fact that there is like a biracial legacy in these trains, like with my grandfather having worked them, and then all these black people going up and down on them, and this person working them for 30 years. And I gotta say, when I went from Salt Lake City to Chicago on my way back from Utah last year on my, what I guess was the final tour of my career, little did I know, that my train attendant was a very old black man who I heard say he had worked for Amtrak for like 38 years. It was this guy. No, I'm kidding, guys. That would make him like 110 years old. Do the math. But that guy might have known this guy. It was like that. It was like that much of a connection. And it's like, you know, it just makes you think of the scope of American history. And it is with great pride that I put The Warmth of Other Suns in the jail book Hall of Fame, where and we're waiving the 5-month waiting period. It was that good. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's like simultaneously this great history and just a great read, and touching, emotional. You feel pride, you feel anger, you feel like, it makes you feel like, and I've had this thought before, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but it's almost like a book podcast at this point. You have the feeling, sometimes when I'm on a highway, or I'm in a big old building, or I'm going through a tunnel, or something, you go, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, men, I'd say men and women, but come on, back in the day, it was just men, but anonymous men gave their lives sometimes during the construction of these things that give us the society we have, or didn't give their lives but worked hard, and their grandkids can maybe go, wow, my grandfather like worked on the Empire State Building, or on this tunnel, or on this bridge. And this is no less like a human equivalent of that. Like the country we are, good and bad, but the country we are is like regular people took incredible bravery to change their lives, to change the country for the better, to better their own lives. And because of racism, they don't get the same. This book really tries to almost correct the idea of like, you know, oh, my grandfather came from Italy, or he sailed the ocean from England or from Ireland to flee this. And those are great stories and meritorious on their own. But this because it's like a double-edged sword, because they were moving from one part of the U.S. to another, they don't get treated like immigrants or migrants the way they deserve to be. They were fleeing danger that was at least as much, if not more, and than out-of-country immigrants, and then never got to have that complete benefit of like, oh, yes, my name was Pavel Sturistan, but now I'm Kirk Douglas. And I'm making up his name, but you get the point. I just changed my name to Kirk Douglas, and then my son will become a famous producer, an actor named Michael Douglas, and we will be revered, famous, wealthy white people. not treated like my grandfather, who was like, a factory working Polish person or whatever, who was like treated like dirt. We can whitewash that literally. That's nothing to shame Kirk Douglas, although I think there's other things in Kirk Douglas's past that are very fucking shameful. Michael Douglas, we'll stick with him. This isn't to shame him. He's a talented guy. He works hard. But the same benefits were not extended because the race is not something you can just change on a piece of paper. You can't alter the course of your family's history just by anglicizing yourself or becoming more American if America views you as other by the features on your face and the color of your skin. I think this book feels like an incredibly artful and well-documented way of correcting that and being like, no, the medical student who took an incredibly frightening and difficult journey from Louisiana to California to make his way as a successful surgeon is at least as, if not more impressive than the person who fled broke from Ireland or from Poland or whatever. And I think this is just putting it in that place and giving you the scope of American history as it relates to black people. It's an incredible book. And I like, it's so... Only the worst people on earth would not want to read this book, would consider it woke or some sort, because it's not even done with sort of, she may have had an agenda, but it's written in such a way which is just like, if you could render yourself colorblind, if you're a bigot, this is a beautiful story. It's the same thing I said about Obama. If he weren't black, every bigot in this country would view his story and his success as the embodiment of the American dream, the part immigrant, raised by grandparents, floating all over, making his way, and becoming a bootstraps monstrous success using his talent and intellect and charisma to become the president of the United States. If he were white, that's all it would be. But because he's black, there is this like, well, it's not quite that. He's a little bit suspicious. I don't like him. I think he's this and that. And that's what you see. And that's why race is still this incredible dividing line. And it wasn't black people who made it the dividing line. And we shouldn't forget that. But I think that's enough talking for me. This book is incredible. Can't recommend it highly enough. So since we discussed this beautiful journey about three great people who made America, helped make America what it is in their own small and medium ways, we're going over bad people next month. We're covering bad people with March's books. So the first is a brand new one that got some great reviews called Unscripted: The Epic Battle for a Media Empire and the Redstone Family Legacy. This is CBS and Viacom's struggle, and apparently everybody's a real piece of shit. So I'm looking forward to that. Just old dudes sexually harassing and trying to get money. And the other one is Woody Allen's autobiography, Apropos of Nothing. Talented comedy guy. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but probably going to be a funny read. And the guy, I do believe, is a comedy genius. So Comedy Genius Game, recognize Comedy Genius Game. So those will be your March books. But thank you, everybody. Hopefully you made it through this one. I felt very strongly about this book because it intellectually and emotionally touched me. It's that good. It's the whole package as far as a nonfiction book goes. So that's it for this week. So thank you for watching. And remember, books, they're like documentaries for smart people.